Hello, beautiful creative people. Kiala Givehand here. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome for the first time. If you're new here, I sure hope you'll stick around and hang out for a bit. So today I am bringing in my mixed media artist energy, blended in a little bit with some fountain pen conversation. Not a lot of fountain pen, but I will be mentioning a fountain pen here. So for those of you who come for the fountain pens, just stay tuned and stay for the mixed media as well. So as an artist, one of the things that I think is really important is that you have a visual vocabulary. And so today I'm going to share with you some of my favorite tools, 10 of my favorite tools. There probably will be more than 10, but definitely 10 of my favorite tools for mark making. And mark making for me is one of the most important tools in your artistic or creative tool belt. Even if you don't consider yourself to be a mixed media artist or an artist in any regard, we all make marks. Whether you are writing letters and words, your handwriting is mark making, right? So even my fountain pen users out there, the way that you make your downstrokes, the way that you dot your I's, all of these are you making marks. So I am going to share with you some of my favorite mark making tools. So let's just get into it. All right, friends, so I'm going to start by saying I have learned from a lot of different teachers over the course of 52 years of my life on this planet. So forgive me if I don't name every single person that I have learned every single thing from. And also some of it is just intuitive. We come here knowing how to make marks. It is innate in us, right? We can go back to cave dwelling time and you can see marks being made on the walls of caves. You can see this in hieroglyphics. You can see this in multiple languages that are very visual languages in the world. And so I invite you to seek out more information on mark making if that is something that's important to you, if you want to know more. Everything from asemic writing to doodling. All of this falls under the umbrella of mark making. It is you making your mark. One of my favorite words in the world is indelible. And the reason I love that is because it is about leaving a mark on the world in some way. And I feel like when we do mark making in our journals, in our in our art journals, in our written journals, in our art journals, in your notebook, on the notepad next to your phone when you're doodling on while you're on hold, whatever it looks like, they are all marks that are of your creative expression in that moment at that time. So I am just going to share with you, first of all, I said all of that to say I didn't invent mark making. I'm not sure we can really name or accredit any one person or any one group of people for having created mark making. I think it is a human expression. And so I hope that you will, just follow along. Share down below in the comments what you think of when you think of mark making. When you hear that term, where does it take your mind? So I'm not going to, there are so many, listen to me when I say there are thousands of things you can use for making marks. All I'm doing right now is bringing you my favorite 10, maybe more than 10, and saying to you, I've been conscious in terms of what I've chosen. I did not choose pens, pencils. Well, that's not true. I did choose one pen. I mean, hello, did you just meet me? You know there's a fountain pen on the list, right? Spoiler alert. But I did not talk about things like crayons, colored pencils, like all of the sort of traditional things we can use to make marks. I'm bringing in some of the things that I think get forgotten or overlooked all too often. So with that, I've just got some random paper here. This is from packaging from probably an Amazon box or something. And this is just some watercolor paper. So I'm not trying to make art with you right now. I am simply showing you some of my favorite tools. So I needed a substrate to work on. And so I've got that. The 3 things I'm going to be using, I'm going to use some acrylic paint. This is by Nova Color. I've just put it in these bottles, but Payne's Gray and Mars Violet. Those are my two favorite colors in their line of paint, but also just in general. I love those colors. So I've got those. I also have some super black India ink, which is one of my favorite. Talk about indelible, leaving an indelible mark. This right here, the super black India ink by Speedball. So I've got some of that as well. So obviously there are the traditional tools for making marks. Those are definitely on my list, but today I'm just focusing on 10 things that I really love using to make marks. So let's do this. I'm gonna put those two there, and I'll have these two here. And I'm doing this so that you can see it on two different types of paper. I love white cream colored paper, but I also really love craft paper, and the brown of this, there's a whole story behind it. I taught a class called Brown Bag Beauties that tells the whole story about brown bag and brown paper bag and craft paper and all of that. But in this moment, oh, the other thing I'm using is a Stays On jet black stamp pad. That will come in handy as well. Okay, so those are the tools that I'm using to help me demonstrate and show you some of my favorite tools for mark making. So I'm going to start with something that might feel crazy to start with, just because it's the first one, but a syringe. I know, go ahead, gasp, it's fine. But really and truly, I know many artists out there probably get this. The syringe is great, and I do know who I learned this from, Tracy Bautista. In fact, there are several tools that I'm going to bring out here that I actually learned from Tracy Bautista. I will leave a link below to Tracy. She is an amazing artist who she's an OG in the mixed media world. She has a series of books out, Collage Unleashed, Printmaking Unleashed. I think there's a third one that I can't think of in this moment, but she has been around and been in the mixed media game for decades, a really long time. And she, when I lived in Oakland, California, she lived very near me, and I went to her studio a couple times for workshops in person with her. She's an amazing soul, just really, really cool person. And I learned a lot of really cool things from her. Using a syringe is one of them. Now, I'm going to put some things in categories. So in the category with the syringe, I'm also putting the pipette. I think that these two things kind of mimic each other in the way in which they allow you to create marks. There's a little bit of control, but also a lot of serendipity. And I think that's a really important thing in mark making. So with the syringe, this actually happens to have, I spilled some fountain pen ink when I was changing out inks in one of my pens, and to pull it up from the table, I just used the syringe, and so that's what's left in here right now. So I'm just gonna gently get it going, get the air sort of down in there. I don't wanna force it too much. Oh, it's gonna splat on me, I can already tell. So I'm gonna do this just in case I get some splash. So this tool, ooh, there's a lot of air built up in there today. There we go. All right, so first and foremost, it just makes interesting marks. But what Tracy taught us to do is to just use it almost as like an extension, and to just, you know, scribble and make marks with it. And I love this. I love the effect that you can get. And there's going to be a moment where even if no ink is coming out, you can use this tool to do that. And I'm actually going to add a third thing. These two to me they go together because you put the ink or the paint or whatever you're using into the body of it, and then you release it back out to make your mark. But the other reason I want to kind of, well, no, I'll leave those two and I'll put this other one with a different category. So the syringe is a really great one. I love when it has these pools of ink, and when that pops and dries, it will be really yummy. So that is one of the things. And I am I'm barely pushing on that. But you can get some really fine lines, but you can also get, you know, bursts and pops of color, you know, if you really want, if you push that air out. right? You can get some, when it gets to the end like that, you can get some little splatters. And then you can just play in the ink or the paint, whatever you're using. And so I really love that as a technique. So Tracy, thank you for that. Always a fun one. I knew that was going to kind of bleed through there. Okay, so that's the first one, a syringe or a pipette. And so similarly, oh, it's kind of bent. Similarly with the pipette, and you can use, for my fountain pen friends out there, you can absolutely use fountain pen ink. For this, I'm using India ink. If I can get it open, we'll see. Maybe I'm using it. Maybe I'm not. Let's see. Okay, that took a little bit of work. So this super black ink, I'm going to use that for the pipette. But the concept is essentially the same, right? So I'm just going to squeeze, dip, pull up a little bit of ink. It always pulls way more ink than I want, but similarly, I'm just releasing a little air at a time, like just pressing a little air through there at a time. And so you can make some really interesting marks with the pipette, because again, you are just, you know, letting it do most of the work, right? You're doing a little bit, but it's giving you, you know, the beautiful flow of some very pronounced and some really light, almost distressed even, right? So mark making. The other thing about mark making is it can be really fluid and loose like this, but it can also be very repetitive. Not repetitive in terms of I want every single one of the marks to look identical, but repetitive in that it becomes this meditative. You just keep making the mark. So if I just kept making this mark all the way across, just sort of doing the same motion and the same, you know, and then I come in and I can make a different mark going back across. All right, so mark making is just really feeling into, it's a little bit intuitive. I mean, there can be some intentionality behind it, but it's also it can be very intuitive. And I think that's what, it's very freeing. It's, even if mark making isn't your thing, I think it's a really great, tool or a great technique for giving yourself permission to play, loosen up. So I'm just gonna go across and just keep making marks. There's no rhyme or reason. So pipette and syringe, really great tools for making marks. I can get lost in this for hours. I really can. Now, some other things that I'll talk about that I'm not using, but see that, what happened right there? Like, you can't, I couldn't have created that if I tried. And that to me is where some beautiful marks start to show up, when you get the serendipity and the surprise of it all. I love it when there's bubbles. So just playing with the tools to see what they can do and what they can create, the kinds of marks they can create for you. All right, so syringe and pipette, I put those two in the same category, and I'm just going to put them to the side there for now. All right, so next up, the next category is going to be things that you can use for scraping. And so I have put in that category a spoon, a fork, and just things you get out of your kitchen. A chopstick. This is a chopstick from a restaurant. You can tell I love using it. I use it quite often. So these for me can be really, I'm going to put this to the side, let it kind of get somewhat dry, and I'll come back to it. But I love these because I'm going to bring in some of the Mars Violet, which is one of my faves. One of my favorites. Okay. Just going to put a little bit right here on the paper. I'm not even going to try to, Not going to try and be fancy today in any way. That's the other thing about mark making is it should feel accessible to you. It should feel easy to come to. It shouldn't feel like you have to go, you know, take 50 classes to figure out how to make marks, right? So one of the things I love to do with the skewer is just dip into it and then just make dots. Dots are circles that are filled in, and I love circles. They represent, for me, cycles, patterns, right? So I can come in and just do that. So that's one way. I also can come in and I can use it for making, you know, I can kind of get more on there and just really use the tool for making the mark. And the mark doesn't need to be the same mark over and over. Like, to me, just rubbing this on here is a way to make a mark. So the skewer, the other thing I love about the skewer, I'll come back and do at the very end here. So the fork, same thing. I'm just getting, but the fork has 4 things that it's doing at once, right? Or however many tines you have on the fork itself. And so this creates a really interesting pattern, right? You can do some zigzags with it. You can scrape it through. So it just depends on, you know, what you're, again, it's about expression, just sort of letting the energy move in a certain way where it creates a mark. And then the spoon, which I think is not used often enough. You can use a lot of different parts of the spoon, but I kind of really like that little piece. I just love this, like, sort of, it's great for rubbing. It makes this sort of distressed sort of mark here. You can use it to just make some really interesting marks based on just the movement of your hand. And I love that a lot. All right, so we've got the spoon, the fork, just common household things that you probably can find. And I just keep the same ones. I let the paint dry on it, and I just keep the same ones and just keep reusing them. So what I was going to say about the skewer at the very end is just coming in and making marks through the paint. So when I put down a bunch of gesso on my paper, I love to come in and just make a mark in the gesso, because when it dries, it creates this almost like this raised or embossed look to it. And I think that's a really cool thing. And then of course, I'm just going to roll that out to kind of get the feel of that. All right. Again, I think I want to go ahead and credit Tracy Bautista for showing me sort of freeing my mind in terms of what can be used to make marks. You get to her studio. I don't know that she's doing studio, you know, in-person things anymore, but back in the day when she was, you would get to her studio and she would have a table filled with the most random of randomest things. And it was quite lovely, because you just pick stuff, you just pick things and you start making marks and you start playing. And it was just always really, really amazing to be in her studio. Okay. The other thing I want to name is things like this, right? Like, I can take this paper and I can just stamp that. And guess what I'm now doing? Making marks. Right? Just keep stamping it as many times as you can. And that creates a very unique mark as well. I like to do it until the paint runs out. Okay, so we've got those things, making marks. That was a little bonus one there. One of my other favorite tools is, speaking of just stamping things on, another favorite tool of mine is a toilet paper roll. And let me tell you, I taught a class once where I showed people how to make a book using toilet paper rolls. And there was a woman in the group, and she was just like, I can't believe you have us using trash to make books. And I don't, this is crazy. It's unsanitary, and it's this, that, and that. She had all these reasons. And she went ahead and she made the book. And at the end of it, she was like, this is the best thing I've ever made. I love it so much. So, you know, there's these moments where we, you know, sometimes we are not quite sure if we're gonna like doing the thing, but they're sanitary unless you put them in the trash. They're not trash until you put them in the trash. So this one has not been in the trash. And so, you know, I think it's important to just keep reiterating that you can use things, all sorts of things all around your home, right, to make marks. Okay, so let me get a little more paint out on my makeshift palette. This paper is going to be really yummy after as well because, right, it'll have all of these all this painty goodness on it. Okay, so with something like this, and I'm going to put these two things in the same category. This is a gift card from Publix grocery store. It can be a gift card, an old library card, an old rewards card, I think is actually what that is, a little rewards card. Who knows? Anyway, so I'd like to just, you know, and this is, again, y'all, I didn't make this up. This is artists, mixed media artists have been doing this since the dawn of time, I'm sure, since the dawn of the creation of these little cards here, right? So again, I get to make these really long lines that are not perfect lines, right? But I can just do this repetitive thing, right? So that's, you know, you can use it for mark making, but you can also obviously use it for putting paint onto things, scraping paint on, lots of other uses for this. But I love that repetitive mark, and you can get a shorter line, you know, on the other side. So really beautiful. And so then this is the same for me. It's just, you know, get it nice and painty. You don't have to do the whole circle. And you just use it to make, you know, make marks. You can use the inside of a tape. When your tape runs out, the inside part of a tape container, you can use that. That's always awesome. You can use, I have a lot of thread, and when the thread runs out, I like to keep the little cardboard piece that it's on because it makes this really cool little circle. So you can find things all around in your studio, all sorts of places where you can find things to make marks. And I'm just rolling that out to kind of get the paint off of there. So mark making, you know, there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, the rhyme and the reason is to make marks, to loosen up, to free your, you know, mind around what is possible in terms of mark making. Okay, so I'm gonna grab another piece of watercolor paper. And I'm just using what I have on hand right here by me. Honestly, probably not the smartest choice. I should probably be using mixed media paper just because my watercolor paper is a little more expensive. But I know that I will end up using these for book covers or for something inside of a book. So I'm not too pressed about it. All right, my next all-time favorite is a brayer. Now this happens to be a little baby brayer, a little mini brayer, but I love brayers. They create this, and the grungier they are, the better they make for mark making, right? You can get all sorts of things. Like, listen, if I didn't know any better, I would look at this and go, oh, that's like a mountain peak with a snowy, right? It just creates these beautiful textures, right? And so mark making with a brayer, right? You can even just, doesn't have to be a full-on brayer. Listen, the thing I love about learning about mixed media when I learned about it is that it helped me understand that there were no rules, that I really could. I mean, there are some rules, don't get me wrong. There are some rules. If you really want to, you know, make a certain kind of art. But I think for me, it was about freedom of expression and really learning that just because a brayer is meant to be rolled like this doesn't mean that's the only way I can use it, right? So those are, to me, those are marks being made, and they're very expressive and they have their own like kind of energy. So brayer is, I'm not even counting at this point, but brayer is another. All right, let's keep it rolling here. I am going to take my own advice here. And maybe, well, I thought I was going to grab a different kind of paper to work with, but I'm just going to keep going. It's paper. Not like I'm wasting it. Okay, moving on to my next favorite is a palette knife. And this just happens to be a really big palette knife, big plastic one. I often use it to put glue on, to put paint. There are no holes barred. I use it for everything. So I'm just going to see if there's anything left on here for me to play with. But I love a palette knife because depending on how you hold it, right, you can get all sorts of things with this. I'll put a little more. Let's get some Payne's Gray out. I haven't put any Payne's Gray out. So I'll put a little Payne's Gray on the palette. We are going to call that a palette. It is a palette. That is a palette that will become something else, I'm sure. So what I love about a palette knife is that you can just dab in there. You can dab with it, right? You can do all sorts of like little marks like that. But you also can use it to do what palette knives do and, you know, spread. I don't have enough on there to really spread, right? But you can use it for spreading. And you can get some really interesting marks using that, doing that. So a palette knife can be used a lot of different ways. But look at that yummy texture I'm getting now. My palette knife has glue and all sorts of stuff on it, so that is impacting and affecting how it, right? One of my teachers at Mills College, Kathleen Walkup, she would always tell us when we're cleaning up the ink from using the letterpress that the palette knife has more than two sides. She would say there's the top side, there's the bottom side, and then there's all the edges around. And when we were cleaning, she was like, you need to clean all the parts, like all the sides. And so I think about that when I'm using a palette knife to make marks. Make marks with all sides of the palette knife, right? Even that tippity tip, right? So even if I just went in and got, you know, I could make these like these little butterfly trails, right? With just the tip of it. So just remember that you can use all parts of the palette knife to make. So a palette knife is really great, especially if you've got a lot of paint that you can move around. It can do some really fun things. All right, palette knife. Next up on my list, well, maybe all of these are going to be in the same category, and we're just going to call them rubber scraping tools. I love these things. I mean, I think they technically have color shapers. They have a name, color shapers or something like that. Anyway, have a bunch of different ones. They, you know, some people use them for clay, people use them for different things, but I love these for mark making. So I can take this and just start making marks. I can also do swipes, right? But I can also just make marks. And so again, multiple sides and really paying attention to that. Right? So making marks with the tools. So I love these. They're easy, they're fun. They come in a bunch of different sizes and shapes. If you know, so here's a bonus mark making tool, is a gelatin plate. There's a lot of people out in the world. I have jelly plates. I'll probably do something at some point here on the channel with my gelatin plate. But it is definitely something that people in printmaking have been using for years, making gelatin in their homes and using it to make art. And now there are some silicone ones out in the world that, you know, you don't have to keep them in your refrigerator. You don't have to worry about them disintegrating or getting moldy, which was definitely a thing when I learned printmaking, mono printing. using a jelly plate before there was a silicone version, right? So again, these little color shapers I think are really great for making marks and just seeing what shows up. Y'all listen, I get caught up in the mark making. Like I could sit here and do this for days. Like really, it makes my heart happy. Okay, so all different shapes, all different sizes. You can play with them, but they're great on a gelatin plate because they're rubber. They're not going to poke holes in the gelatin plate. And you can use them to remove paint to create things that way. And that's a really cool way. You can also use them to put paint on. So either way. All right, so color shapers and, you know, sort of rubber tools. And then obviously I have brought the wrong one over here, so I'm not going to use it, but I am going to tell you about it because this is my one for watercolor. Oh, you know what? Let's just use watercolor because I have some watercolors over here. So we will use watercolor. So brushes. I mean, that's a duh, right? It's like, well, most artists are using just gonna put in 2 colors here. Many artists, not all, are using brushes to make marks, right? Your brush, I guess I should probably have some water on the brush. What do you think about that? I hadn't really planned to use these, but your brush also makes marks, right? So I'm doing a horrible job of demoing that in this moment. So yeah, using your brush to make marks. I forgot how much I love that color. I haven't used this little palette in a while. So your brush can make all sorts of marks going on, right? The actual brush stroke itself, but also, and I didn't want to put that in acrylic because it's not an acrylic brush. This is definitely a watercolor brush. So just noticing, yeah, okay. So you can make the mark of the brush itself, right? Let the brush itself do it. But as the brush dries, you can see a little dry brushing there. You're going to get different things. So making marks with the brush is also super fun. Like instead of trying to paint something, you're just making marks and see what the brush does. See what it does if you, you know, try to dab with it, if you flick it, if you do the whole, you know, skinny side or the flat side, or you press down hard and lift, right? Play with your tools and see what they can do. All right, so brush. All right, my friends, we're down to the last 2 that I'm going to show for tonight. My absolute favorite, all-time favorite, #1 favorite. Okay, not #1, but darn close, is bubble wrap. So I'm just going to put a little bit of paint on there and just using it as a stamp. Makes me happy. This is one of my all-time favorites. Again, I want to say that this technique is also one that I learned from Tracy Bautista. Tracy, you are all in my video today, sister. This is one of my absolute favorite things to do because you can't, like nothing else can create that. Like I could never create that if I took a brush and tried to meticulously draw those circles. Like you just won't get that. You just won't. So I love this, and you can use this. I did not use the stamp pad, but you could absolutely use a stamp pad for this. All right, I'm going to bring this one over and just do some layered mark making on this. It's got a bunch of paint to get rid of here. And this is, for me, this is meditative. Like I could literally stamp this darn bubble wrap over and over again for days on end. Because to me, it just adds a layer of texture and dimension that you can't really get with anything else. So find different types of bubble wrap. The large bubbles do something completely different. I mean, they're going to give you, you know, marks, but they're going to look different than these marks, which I think is really pretty cool. Yeah. So fun. And it's just remember when you were a kid, if you were someone who really loved popping these things, it's like the resistance. Don't pop it, don't pop it. You're just doing little baby massages on the back of this thing. And so anyway, this is a really cool one as well. I think I'm going to try something I haven't really done before. Putting a little bit of not watercolor. I mean, I could do watercolor, but I was thinking fountain pen ink. I haven't done this with fountain pen ink and just stamping all over. All right, friends. So I've got a bunch of marks that I've made. I'm going to pull out one more little piece here. Actually, let's see, is this dry? It's dry enough. We'll use this one. So I've got some good paint to play with later. And even just cleaning off my tools is a form of mark making. It just really is. Last but definitely 1000% never least is a fountain pen. Now, this is a Rotring art pen, which some people will say, oh, that's like a calligraphy pen or whatever. To me, it's a fountain pen. It has a nib. It's an extra fine. It takes a cartridge or a converter. It is lovely and amazing. I do not have it inked up, so what I'm going to do is just grab... What inks do I have here? I always have some kind of inks in front of me. I wanted something dark. Oh, platinum carbon black. So I'm just going to dip into that. Dip the pen, just dip the nib in so that just so you can see. Now, obviously, many of you probably are like, duh, Kiala. But I think there's something really interesting to pay attention to when you're making marks with a fountain pen. Now, this is an extra fine, but if you had a flex nib or a nib that makes lines that are, the downstroke is different than the, than your upstroke, I think you would, see something a little different and maybe even think about the tool a little differently. So just mark making with a fountain pen because it can create, let me just do let's do a little play here. There may actually be ink in this pen. I might be underselling it here. There might actually be ink in it. But I don't think there is because I don't remember ink. Oh, well. No. Anyway, so obviously I'm ending with the fountain pen because a fountain pen is a really beautiful, just depending, like get different nibs, try different sizes, different inks, but the fountain pen can be, or, I would also put in this category, dip pens, glass dip pens, anything that lets you mimic the writing. These are really great if you're doing like asemic writing. Right? If you're doing asemic writing, even though you all probably can't read that that's what that says, but that's the whole point of asemic writing. It's not necessarily meant to be legible. You can know. It's just strokes. I said, thank you, YouTube. So play with your tools. So those are my favorites. I'm going to go ahead and count them back for you. Ooh. All right, let's count it back. We've got, I'm not going to go in the exact order because I don't remember the exact order, but fountain pens, rubberized tools like color shapers. There's lots of those. Palette knives, Brayers, pipettes, syringes, skewers, spoons and forks or household items. Also, toilet paper rolls or anything that can make circles, bubble wrap, and gift cards, anything like that. All of these, how many is that? We're calling these 1, 2. These are all 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, look at that. I can give you one more for 10. So let's go and do one more. I already know what to do because I was sitting here going, no, I didn't get to show them my other favorite. All right, so let's bring out number 10 for 10 on the 10th. Number 10 is going to be stamps, all sorts of stamps. So, as a printmaker, one of my favorite things that I have ever learned to do is to carve stamps. And I have to say a huge thank you to Kathleen Walkup and Julie Chen at Mills College for teaching us about linoleum cutting and making our own stamps. That was a game changer for me because I love making marks, and being able to make my own stamps that have my own sort of symbolism on them has just been delightful. And I have continued that practice over the years. I've waxed and waned with it over the years. And what I mean by that is I'll come to it and I'll be like, okay, yeah, stamping, fine. And then I'll go, oh my gosh, I miss my stamps. I miss making stamps. I talked recently about spirals, so I'll do a little spiral stamp. All right, so these are all, everything in this box is a hand-carved stamp. And I just love the fact that you can tell it was hand-carved with some of the, what I call the stutter lines. I just think that that is so, to me, that's being able to see the hand of the person making it in the making. That just brings me joy. But what I really love is when I just take little bits like this and I just make random stamps. Like, that is nothing really, but it could just be, again, it's just mark making. Right, so you can play with that. Just taking the bits and pieces that get cut off when you're making the bigger stamp and using those. Like, that's my favorite part. Yes, I can make a very well thought out, intricate sort of stamp, but these ones that are more organic, these are actually my favorites. The ones that look like they have no rhyme or reason to exist. They're just random. These are actually some of my favorite ones. And I have tons of them. I have all these like little bits and pieces that were just leftovers, you know? They were just leftovers, and I was sitting there and I was just playing. And I love those. These are, like I said, these are some of my favorite ones. The ones that are just the little bits and bobs. Oh, here's a little fountain pen nib one that I made. I think I have a class where I taught how to make your personal symbols. I'll link that down below for you all. Might be one of my free classes. I can't remember if it's free or not. But yes, like these are some of my personal lexicon, like these symbols, hearts and fountain pen nibs and, you know, spirals and concentric circles. Like, these are things that I make and doodle over and over and over again. They're just a part of my personal lexicon, my personal symbology. And I love carving stamps, so I can't believe that I almost did not do this one in the video. So there you go. You've got it. 10. I will show you also, since I've been talking about Tracy Bautista and bringing her up so many times here, I will show you also a set of stamps that I learned how to make from Tracy. I just want to, even something as simple as I just carved little lines in that. Like, there's nothing very fancy about that at all. It's just lines. But I think it just is such a cute stamp, you know? Just so yummy. So absolutely scrumdiddlicious. Okay. So stamps. Hand-carved stamps. Obviously, you can purchase stamps. But I think there's something really magical about making your own stamps. And then using those stamps to make marks. You can even do words. Here was, I think this was my word of the year one year. Hope. Yeah, right? You can even make stamps that are words. So again, these really sort of organic ones, the ones that were like the offcuts, the ones that I wasn't sure I would use for anything, they end up being my favorite ones. They really do. So a big thank you to my teachers from Mills for introducing me to stamp carving. And I don't do linoleum carving because, man, was that, they taught us that first. They, you know, showed us that first. Then they showed us the rubber stamps. And these are just so much easier to carve, but you know, they're different. You get a different look with each one. So before I go, I'm going to show you the last set of stamps, since we're talking stamps. And these are using foam material. And again, this is a Tracy Bautista lesson I learned from her. We went to her studio. She gave us these blocks that were just blank blocks, kind of like this one, just blank blocks. And then she gave us foam pieces, and the foam pieces kind of look like, you know, they're this. They have a little sticky back on them. Not all of them have sticky backs, but she had us making them on just cardboard, right? So we would make them on cardboard. And you have these stamps. Now, they're very different than the rubber stamps. They give you a very different texture on the paper. But listen, I'm just going to pull out a few of them. I'm not going to stamp them all, but I just want to show you, like, Tracy she created a monster in me. She taught us how to do these ones where you can have, what do I have? 4, 5, 6. I just use this as a stamp, just a blank, whatever. But once I did this and she taught us how to do these, I just went hog crazy. Do you understand? I just started making all sorts of crazy stamps that were just, and I couldn't stop. And I love them. They are like some of my favorite stamps. I have this is one container of many, but I just have these I think are waiting to become stamps. Just cut up little pieces of cardboard. But also Tracy taught us to take these acrylic blocks and just glue pieces on. Oh, that one looks like it's kind of come off there. But we just use glue and glued the strips or the dots or whatever you were making, whatever design you were making, onto the acrylic block. You can still use the acrylic block for other stamps if you wanted to, but now you've got this sort of double-sided thing. You could also put stamps on both sides, right? And so it was just, listen, y'all, when I say I went a little crazy, I went a little crazy. This is one container of many that I have. So this is, again, is just mark making, another form of mark making. And because they're foam, they press differently, they stamp differently. You get a completely different look and feel with these, and they're just, yeah, amazing. In fact, I have a few that Tracy was just like, here, y'all take some of the ones I made with this other material. I can't remember what this material is called. It's kind of foamy soft, but these are a few that Tracy gave us to take with us. This is one she made, her little signature sort of flower that she does. But again, it creates a different, you know, it's not as crisp. They're not going to be as crisp as the ones that you make with rubber substrate. So many options for mark making, y'all. Just don't, no rhyme or reason. They don't have to make sense to anybody but you. Like some people might look at that and be like, you really, Kyla? That's what you did? And I'm like, really? Yeah, it really is. It really, really is. And they clean up easily. Some people wash theirs. I don't wash mine. I'm just keeping it honest. I don't wash mine. I don't know, for better or for worse. But yes, I love it. So good. And then you just rotate it a little bit and boom, more. So some of these stamps that I'm showing you in this little pile are from 2013, 14, when I went to Tracy's studio and took a class with her. And they've just lasted this long. They are good and sturdy. She showed us these little ones too. I think we call these marshmallows when I was a teacher. We give them to the kids. You warm them up and they carve into them and do all sorts of things. So lots of options for mark making. I hope that this has inspired you to run into your kitchen, grab a few tools, or to look in your stash, and maybe you remember making something like this at some point and going, oh, I forgot I did those, right? That happens to me a lot where I'm like, oh, right, I did make this. And so I hope that this has inspired you, maybe even to go raid the closet or art supply stash of your kids or your grandkids, right? Because some of these things are just things that our kids would be using in school as well, right? So lots of wonderful ways that you can make marks, free your creative energy, give yourself permission to play. Mark making for me is a very primal experience. It's very raw and real. It's you at your, truest, most, can be you at your most truest and most authentic version of you. So I invite you to grab some of the tools I've shared today. Tell me down below which ones you already use, which ones you're excited to try. Tell me if you already have been making stamps, what your favorite materials are to make stamps. Just talk to me. Tell me what y'all are doing with these mark making ideas. Okay, friends, I had to come in and give you a number 11 bonus tool for mark making. It's so obvious, and it's one of the ones that you can have with you at all times, no matter what, wherever you are. It's easy, it's accessible, and it's yours. No one else will ever have anything like it. It's your fingerprint. So I'm just going to dab. Now, some people are going to feel squeamish about this, and I tell you to make sure you're using paint that you feel comfortable with. The paint that I'm using is a water-based acrylic, and so I feel pretty comfortable with it. And it's not so much about getting your actual fingerprint, but just about using your fingers. And so your fingers are another mark-making tool. So I invite you to just play and let your fingers be another tool. So while they can make marks, they can also, we as kids, we were taught to do finger painting, right? So even that, we were learning our own visual vocabulary and our visual language. Something that is unique to you that nobody else in the world will have are your fingerprints. So I invite you to play with that as your number 11 tool for mark making. And so just to end us on a lovely note, here are the lovely pages that are just waiting for me to come and play with them a little bit more and do a little bit more with them. They all have different yummy loveliness on them, and I do believe that they will provide lots of yummy stuff for my stash for me to play with. And there's that one with all of my stamps, and that's not even scratching the surface of the stamps that I've carved and made. So lots of opportunity for play. You could spend a whole year just making mark box. So I invite you to play and have a good time. Thanks. I am so happy to finally get another 10 on the 10th in the books. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spreading your creativity in the world. We need it now more than ever. Your creative truth, your creative expression. Step onto the path of your creative journey if you haven't already. Now is the time, because I personally believe that the creatives in the world, those of us with kind hearts, those of us who are really wanting to do good work in the world and help other people realize their creative power, we are going to make the biggest difference. So get yourself into your studio, get yourself to your art table or your kitchen table, and just create something. It doesn't need to be a masterpiece. It just needs to be you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.